Anne, and I've got some stuff written on a paper, so bear with me as I read it out. Anne Koopmann-Schmidt is from Melbourne. She's a leadership coach, such as myself. She's also a lecturer and a speaker. Anne's style of coaching focuses on strengths-based coaching. Anne has been teaching Leadership for Innovation as part of Melbourne University's Innovation Practice Program. That sounds really cool, Anne. And we have loads in common, and one memory I have of you is we actually bumped into each other last Christmas at Sydney Airport, and since then Anne and I have kept in touch, and she's been quite the accountability partner for myself. We support each other as entrepreneurs and as CEOs of our own businesses. And one of the things, Anne, I think people ask or think about is, why are you interviewing another coach? Because you have so much to offer that's different to me. I love your style. I love your vibe, Anne. And I just wanted to say hello, sister, and welcome. And I'm really pleased to expand people's knowledge about all things you and everything that you offer. So welcome, Anne.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And yes, I remember our little bump in Sydney Airport. We knew each other from Instagram, and then suddenly you're like, Anne? And then
Yep.
yeah, that was quite funny on our way back from our Christmas holidays.
Small world, isn't it?
A long time away now that we actually were at airports and able to travel. But yeah, pretty amazing. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And today I want to talk to you about learning from 2020 and planning for 2021. But before we launch into that, I've got a question for you. Have you ever had a coach for yourself? And how do you suss out coaches for you?
Sure. Yes, I had many coaches for myself. And I think it started for me when I was still in my corporate career. So I'm an engineer originally, and I used to work in the manufacturing industry for 10 years and had quite a steep, successful leadership career. And at one point, I took like my first bigger step. So I was leading like small teams, and then I started to take over a whole department. And I was quite intimidated by that challenge. I was excited, but at the same time, I was really worried. And I remember asking my manager, my new manager at that time, about a coach, and I said I would love to, you know, get some support along the way to help myself gear up and just be ready for whatever challenge will, you know, come thrown at me. And I remember that manager saying that he doesn't support it, and it was just interesting because at that point in that company, coaching was seen as an intervention. So it was almost like coaching was done, and people invested in coaches when it was already too late. So when leaders were in trouble, when there was an issue or a big conflict with one of their team members, that's when people got a coach. And so it was almost actually like a bad stigma attached to it, that when you have a coach, it's already a sign that you failed. And so he pretty much said, you don't need a coach, you'll be fine. And I said, but I would love a coach to invest in myself so that I don't end up struggling and stressing. And after a lot of back and forth, he said, yeah, okay, there's one coach that we work with. This is the person that you can work with. You can have one session. One session with the person. I couldn't do it myself. She was working with some other colleagues, so she knew the company, which was an advantage. But I remember it being quite a formal conversation. And it didn't really feel like, it almost, I think because she was chosen by my manager, it almost just felt a little bit like I couldn't be 100% myself. So it was more awkward than it was really helpful. And from that moment on, though, I invested in my own development. I invested in courses outside of my work, did my own strengths development, for example. And now in my business, I have had a few coaches along the way or people that I invested in. And I think to suss out a coach, I think it's important that there's this initial connection. And whatever that means for you, like, it's like a little spark, I think. And you just know either you can see yourself in the person, maybe they've gone through something similar than you have, They might share the same values as you. I think that's really important. Their approach to coaching is similar to what speaks to you. So I think it's really amazing nowadays that lots of coaches like you and I, Prina, that we are on social media, right? And we show up every day and we share things about ourselves, and we share what we're all about. We share our values and we share our focus when it comes to coaching. And I think that's really important, because that's an easy way to just follow us, engage with us, and see over time if it clicks and if it feels right. Because every coach is so different in their approach and what they put the focus on. So with leadership coaches, you might find coaches that are very much set on how to get you from a certain level to an executive position. So their coaching might be a lot focused on how do you position yourself in the marketplace, how do you manage stakeholders, how do you bring your brand out there, and how do you sell yourself going forward, and then maybe how do you do like big business planning, budgeting, these kind of more executive, very businessy type strategies, which is super important. And for some people, that's really important. For me, for example, my focus is more on the inner development. Like, what do you need to do within you to feel confident and to feel ready to lead the change or lead the team, and also to be ready to encourage and empower your team members, because it takes a lot of energy. So for me, I focus on that transformation within you to build that confidence. And then, of course, give you tips and tricks to manage people. But my focus is people, not so much your career, your executive career, if that makes sense. So I think that's where differences can lie. So I think it's important. Do you feel like you connect to them? Can you see something in them? Do they remind you of something, or have they a similar background to you? Do you feel like they can actually help you for what it is that you want?
Absolutely, at the right stage of your career as well. And like yourself, Anne, I've had a number of coaches, and it's really interesting that you mentioned that a lot of organizations still think about coaching as an intervention when things have gone wrong. And I do get many calls in relation to that as well. But then I'm really seeing a shift in people actually being proactive with their own career now, because our careers are so important, especially in the current changing environment, whereby leadership has completely changed. You know, the expectations of leaders, the expectations of managers. Therefore, people are definitely sussing out me more, and I'm sure yourself more as well. So I know, Anne, you're on LinkedIn, you're on Instagram. I'll post all of your details in the show notes here, so people can go and stalk you as well.
Sounds good.
Excellent. And I've got, so learning from 2020 and planning for 2021 is the topic of our conversation today. And I know you're based in Melbourne. Are you guys still in lockdown?
Yes, we're still in lockdown.
It has been a while, hasn't it?
It's the start of October. Yeah, it's pretty much since mid of March now. We had like a few easing of rules in June, but we were still restricted. We still couldn't have many guests at our home and things like that. And now, since I think now 13 weeks, we're back in full lockdown. We're still quite restricted. We can only leave our home 5 kilometers from home. We can only leave the house for 2 hours. People are still working remotely. So it's been now, over 6 months of that. So I think that's a big challenge, and it had a big impact on this whole year for everybody, personally and professionally, I think. So I think that it's even more so important that we start to think, okay, how can we as leaders make sure that we bring this year to still some positive end and like a success in the end, and start to focus on the positives.
Absolutely. And you and I have been talking about strategic planning, and I hosted my own strategic planning day earlier this week. I know you do similar stuff like that. So from an organization's perspective, strategic planning, given that it's nearly the end of the year, what do you recommend organizations do, and how can they go about that?
I think there's two things that you need to keep in mind. Like, of course, strategic planning is important. Strategic planning is important to see, okay, how far have we come this year, and where do we want to position ourselves next year, based on overall targets, but also based on where we are right now or what was possible this year. So you might want to adapt and change your targets. You need to check if you're still aligned to your purpose, and if the goals that you're setting are still realistic, or if you have to make some adjustments, because course, we have to acknowledge that every year is different, especially this year. But I do think, yes, plan a strategic day with your team to also, you know, plan for the year ahead so they all understand the big picture. I think that's really, really important. But at the same time, I think it's important to plan some personal, more personally focused end of year days with your team, where it's about celebrating the people and their growth and the team itself, celebrating their successes, their efforts, and then maybe also planning what do they want to get out of next year personally? How can we help and support them in their growth? And maybe even invest in some extra training or some team sessions with where you bring in a facilitator. Might it be, you know, a strengths assessment? Might it be any other personality assessment or even emotional intelligence, or something that invests in them as people and helps them in their growth? But at the same time, you can connect that then to your strategic plan, of course, because of course, yes, your team has to deliver. And of course, you know, we're working in a business environment, so the targets and the goals of the business are important. But I think it's important to not just think about the business and to not just think strategically, where can we bring the business next? I think it's really important to invest time in your people and show them that you care as well. So I think it's just important to be a bit careful there to have both things planned for your end of year.
You make a really, really good point, Anne, about celebrating success, because guaranteed there's been so much success this year. All organizations, I'd have to say, have had to pivot in some way or another. People have worked so hard, and recognition from the traditional perspective, the traditional HR perspective, doesn't really land. So how can you recognize your team? How can you celebrate their successes? How can you learn also? So when I used to be a people manager, and I used to run these sessions post projects or post big hurdles that we had achieved, I used to call them post-mortem sessions, and they were really rip everything apart. Let's just learn from the good, the bad, and the ugly, and let's celebrate it all, and then move forward to the next project or the next year, or whatever it might be. So important for the workforce, absolutely.
100%, and I think especially now, and especially, I'm not sure how it is in WA, if people are still working remotely or if people have kind of gone back to half-half.
Yeah, bit of a mix.
Victoria, it's pretty much still remotely, right? And I think it's so important to acknowledge and celebrate that. Like, everybody adapted, everybody managed to still be productive, you know. Like, I think that was a big shift for a lot of leaders, especially those that need this control, that need the micromanaging. Some people just prefer that. They just need that as a safety, and for them to let go and trust their team to work properly and effectively when they're working from home and you have no control really. I think it's a really hard shift for managers and also for team members, and working on that new dynamic. How do we communicate? How do we follow up? How do we share our results? How do we create visibility? I think it's really important to review how that worked as well, and do acknowledge that everybody's done an amazing job. So many people have juggled so much on the plate now with kids being home from school or daycare. You know, these are really tough circumstances, and I think it's celebrating that they still achieved certain things in their roles, even though they were so stressed. And, you know, I've gone through, I have a 2-year-old, you know, and
yes,
from home with a 2-year-old for a few weeks is really, really challenging. So I think celebrating that people have gone through that and managed to get through and still deliver. Yes, maybe they didn't deliver, you know, everything that would have delivered if everything would have been normal. Yep. But under the circumstance, I'm sure that most people have done an amazing job. And I think that's just important to highlight. And another thing that you said with the pivoting.
Yes.
Like, look for those little creative moments that every business had. Yes, some businesses went, you know, big, crazy pivots, super innovative and fantastic. But every little business would have found their little innovations of how they communicate, how they share, which new tools they embraced, you know. The Zoom, suddenly everybody had to be on Zoom. And at the start, everybody was scared to put on the camera. And even just celebrating, oh my God, we're 6 months in and still everyone has the camera on, you know. Yeah. That's fantastic. Or how many teams have done amazing creative online celebrations, online meetings, online team building activities. A friend of mine, she works in a great company, and you know, they have so many little events where they come together for a trivia, or they have a theme day, and so they all dress up a bit, or you know, the company sends them vouchers for Uber Eats or whatever, and they get together and they have a chat and everybody eats, or they get some drinks. And I think that doesn't cost much for a business, right? And just thinking about, okay, what have we actually done and how great have we embraced this? And some companies have done an amazing job of building the team spirit and really taking care of their teams while being remotely. And then also every employee has started to embrace new technology. And I think that is a success, right? Let's embrace that. Let's embrace that we've all managed to adapt to this. I think that's such a big success. And that will fuel any company going forward in 2021, no matter if people go back to the office or not. But just the ability for everybody to embrace this technology will save the company money and will make them more effective going forward.
Absolutely. And one of the points you talked about earlier when you mentioned leaders is this year has been the year of trust for many, many leaders. I know you've supported many leaders this year, as have I. Do you want to talk about trust and strengths in relation to the kind of work that you've been supporting leaders on this year, Anne?
Yeah, sure. I think trust is an interesting one, right? Because you, as a leader, you always have to give trust first before your people trust you. You have to be ready and courageous enough to trust people. And yes, sometimes, you know, you might get disappointed, but most of the time it will be fine. But it does take taking risk a little bit and, you know, making yourself vulnerable. And I think just important to acknowledge that, okay, I'm trusting them now, it could go wrong, let's see how we go, and telling yourself, okay, when do I follow up and how do I follow up to make sure that they still see that I trust them. I think that's really important. But then the other way, how do you make sure that you're a very trustworthy leader in these times of change and uncertainty? I think that's important too. How do you show up? How do you make sure that you're always accessible? How do you make sure that you share what you know, that you don't keep secrets, be transparent as you can? How can you make sure that you follow through? How can you make sure that, you know, you are authentic, you are real, share your stories, share your struggles? I think that's really important too. The more you can share with them, and again, trust them first. You are being vulnerable, you're sharing your stories and maybe your insecurities. I think that can really go a long way now, and in this year of change and uncertainty. So I think that's really important. And so when I worked with the leaders this year, I really tried to just help them to have some faith in their team. And everybody is, you know, in general, no matter if we're in a pandemic or not, I 100% believe that most of the people generally want to do a good job.
Yes.
We don't go to work to create trouble or do a shit job, you know, like we all want to do a good job. We want to be recognized for who we are. We don't all want to have a steep career, and that's fine, right? But we all want to fulfill our role. I genuinely believe that. And if there is an issue, or if they don't fulfill their role, it's a sign that there is an issue, either a personal issue or an issue within the company. They don't feel seen, they don't feel appreciated, or there might be a conflict underlying somewhere. So I think this basic genuinely belief is so important as a leader, to just trust, okay, people are not here to make my life hard. They are here to do a good job, be paid for what they do, and be recognized for who they are and seen and appreciated. And I think if you just put that in your mind, and that's what I tell the leaders I work with, is to really just be like, just trust that they want to do a good job.
Yeah.
And start to see, okay, what's going on? Like, ask them, what's going on? What's hindering you? What do you need from me? Ask for regular feedback. I think that's really, really important in general. And yeah, that's kind of to the topic of trust, I think.
Absolutely. Communication has never been more important than this year, especially, I'd have to say, between leaders and their teams. And I have a question for you. So you're a lecturer on innovation for leadership. Are there any themes that have come up this year with your cohorts that you've had the privilege of teaching? Are there any lessons from there in relation to innovation for leadership, Anne?
I think leadership for innovation is the class that I teach, and the key for leading for innovation is really to create a safe environment, because innovation takes creativity. Yep. Innovation takes people that are ready to take a risk. They need to feel trusted again, right? And they need to know that they can make mistakes and that that's okay, and that they can think out the box. But for doing that, you need to feel relaxed. If we feel under pressure, our brain can't actually think creatively. We also need some space to think. We need time to think. We need some, you know, empty space in our calendars where we can just start to think and be creative. So I think this year, with lots of stress, it's has probably caused a few people to kind of lose their creativity for a while because they felt pressured and stressed. And also, You know, creativity takes often brainstorming and bouncing ideas off one another. And of course, we're missing a little bit this creative interaction because we're not together in an office. But I've seen so many really cool tools again being embraced online. The Miro software, I don't know if you've used that, but it's just such a fantastic brainstorming and collaboration tool that we've really used in our teaching now as well, because we had to adapt. We had to adapt our teaching from face-to-face to online and managing interactive sessions. And, you know, anyway, any workshops we facilitate, or all my workshops I had to transition online. And then tools like the Miro board, you can still really well interact, and it's colorful, you know, it sparks creativity. So you can still kind of replicate that. But yeah, it's about how can you allow your team members to have that space, to get a bit of time to think. How can you spark their creativity? And, you know, you probably have to get creative yourself to spark that. But the baseline is they need to feel safe.
Exactly. And you make a really good time about allowing the time for it as well. So whilst we're working from home, you know, often people have to log their hours or whatever, also wonderful, but it's allowing that time for balcony time is what I call it. So that creative thinking time, so that you can come up with new ideas, or you can review what's been working well and what hasn't been working well. And I have a free self-coaching guide in relation to that, and I know you've got, and you're really practical like myself as a coach as well. Are there any practical tools that you have that I can share with the people that are listening?
With regards to creativity?
Or just anything that will help leaders?
Oh yeah, so I mean, with regards to creativity specifically, not at the moment, nothing that is a free resource at the moment, but there's a few. I mean, but one thing that I share, I have a monthly newsletter where I share, I always have a certain topic, and I share tips and tricks. I share resource tips, books, and yeah, just things like that. So that's a really good resource to sign up to. Then I have a few free guides, like a emotional intelligence guide of how you can set up
so important
your emotional intelligence. And I do have a guide for finding balance in your life. So that's probably good for creativity. How can you reassess your life and your whole life balance, work-life balance? I don't like to call it that way. I call it your life balance, because everything belongs together. And how much energy are you spending on certain elements of your life, like your social life, your finances, your career, your creativity. And that's just a quick little tool and guidebook that I can send you the link so you can share that. And that's a really good session you can do probably once a quarter to just see, am I still in alignment how I want to live my life right now? And that could be really good. And yeah, another great resource is I'm actually launching my podcast on the 15th of October. All about courageous leadership and for emerging leaders and also small business owners, with practical tips every week. So yeah, it's called the Lead Like You podcast, and yeah, make sure you check that out, because yeah, I'll be showing up every week with some new tips.
I'm excited for you. And you've also got a Facebook group that you really engage with your audience on there. I know you share loads of insights and all sorts there, so that's another gold mine that people can
True, yes, that's true. That's another really beautiful community. And yeah, I do monthly trainings there and answer any questions and just share some prompts and ideas and tips every week.
Yeah.
Thinking and get you investing in your development.
Excellent. And okay, 2 questions. So question number 1, I'll start with, we've got less than 80 days left until Christmas. What can we do now? So we've talked about celebrating strengths, planning, as well as focusing on the future with that human element and learning about what's worked and what hasn't worked and bringing your team on board. We've talked about development. We've talked about potentially sussing out coaches and things that you need as a leader or as an employee. Is there anything else that you recommend the leaders or people who are working can do before the end of the year?
I think one important thing is you sit together with your team now, or you with your manager, to start to talk about performance and goals and targets and where you're at, progress check-ins.
Yep.
And from now until the end of the year, make it a regular event if that hasn't happened. I always tell people to have regular one-on-ones and check in performance, to not wait for this yearly awkward performance review where you suddenly talk about targets that are actually not aligned anymore, things went wrong and you actually have no idea, and then it becomes awkward, you use shame, and it goes downhill from there. But if you I've done that now. Like, sit with your manager, or if you're the manager, sit with your team now one-on-one and regularly start to refocus. Okay, where are we actually at? We have 80 days left. What is it we want to achieve, and what can we achieve, and how can I as your leader support you to get there? And then regularly check up so we don't have any surprises at the end of the year, because that's so unfair towards your employees and your team members, because things have changed, things have, you know, priorities change all the time. They have things that happen, things go wrong, mistakes, things like that. Make sure that you check in regularly, and if you haven't done it, do it now, going forward every week until the end of the year, so that you can really together make sure that you reach the last priorities of this year.
Perfect. And then you're set up for 2021 as well.
Yeah.
And my final question for you, Anne, what is one way that you would change the workplace?
That I would change the workplace?
Yep.
That's a good question.
You had a magic wand, what would you change? One thing.
I would change that nobody can yell anymore in a workplace.
Yep, absolutely. I had a really good interview recently with a lecturer called Dr. Ludmila Praslova, and she talks about the end of loudership is how she termed it. Completely, yeah.
Yes. I've seen that a lot in my own career, and people bringing other people down, which has always to do with that person's insecurities, always. It's never about the other person, because shouting has no place in the workplace. There's no place anywhere, not in your family, not in the workplace. Of course, we're humans and it can happen, and we know we all lose it sometimes, totally fine. But it's just has no place at work. We need to respect everybody. We need to appreciate everybody. And as I said, everybody is trying their best. And shouting and putting others down in a workplace has no place for me. And that's what I want to change. And that's why I'm a leadership coach, because I think there's a different way to be a leader.
Absolutely. And I think you're wonderful. Everyone's going to think you're wonderful. I'm going to post all of your details in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.